All right, this is Chapter 4 Additional Notes. I will send you out this file as well as putting this link here so you can have it. But the first part of it, talking about the cell theory, I covered already. Cell structure, these are just parts that most eukaryotic cells have in common. All cells have a cell membrane, they all have DNA, they all have cytoplasm, and in that cytoplasm they all have ribosomes. So those are 4 parts that all cells have in common, whether they're prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Plant cells have a cell wall and chloroplasts, animal cells do not, and animal cells have centrioles and plant cells do not. So there are specific things that I do want you to get a hold of that are found in one type of cell but aren't found in the other. What I want to spend a little bit of time on is cell transport. I talked briefly about it and showed you the plasma membrane, talked how it's semi-permeable and gave you a few examples. But cell wall of plants have large pores where most stuff can easily pass through them, but the wall itself beyond the pores is non-permeable, so it kind of is a coating that protects the plant from losing a whole bunch of water, and it gives it structure as well. The cell membrane, though, is what controls what gets into and out of the cell. So in the cell wall, pretty much anything can come into the pores, but the cell membrane controls what actually enters into the cell after it gets through the cell wall. So again, the cell membrane is the outer layer of the animal cell just inside the cell wall of plants. Small molecules like carbon dioxide and water can pass through the phospholipids, but water has to go through a pore, and they do that through osmosis and diffusion. So large molecules like sugar and starch cannot pass through without the help of the cell membrane. Water can't either. It has to have a special protein called an aquaporin. But large molecules like sugar and starch, actually, sugar has a special pore I showed you in the last video that changes shape and allows it to pass through, and starch actually has to go through with active transport, so it has to have energy to get it through. But diffusion is the movement of a substance from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. We've always talked about spraying perfumes or body gas, but it moves from high to low concentration. And you're going to do that actually this upcoming week in your lab. We're going to be working with osmosis and diffusion. So substances the cell needs are usually more concentrated outside the cell, whether that's in your blood or just in the cell environment, and that might include food or oxygen, whereas waste products are usually higher inside the cell, and so they'll move out and food will move in really easily. Water is a specific kind of diffusion. It's talking about, or osmosis, sorry, it's a specific kind of diffusion talking just about water, and it's where water moves across the cell membrane, again, from high to low. In plants, the cell wall helps prevent the inflow of so much that the cell bursts, so it kind of acts as a little barrier there. And in plants also, they have this large central vacuole that will store up a bunch of water and puts pressure on that wall to keep it upright, and if it lowers in water, then the vacuole will kind of shrink and your plant will wilt. So that's what you're seeing when your plant's wilting but not dying, is that vacuole shrinking away from the cell wall. But once it's available, you can take it in. So those big houseplants with those really big, pretty leaves, and they'll kind of droop down whenever they don't have enough water, and you fill them up, and you can watch the leaves come up in a couple of minutes. That's what's going on. So the other section of this that I really wanted to emphasize was energy for cells. All cells need energy, just as organisms made of food need energy. Glucose, or sugar, is the source of most energy. Plants can make their own glucose, but without photosynthesis that they do to make their own sugar, life wouldn't exist. We wouldn't exist, because they have to change that light energy into chemical energy, and then they also have to break it down, but we have to get it from them to break it down. So you do have a word equation here that you need to know for your test. I just sent out an email that said, oops, I forgot a couple of questions. Here they are. So I sent them to you, and this is what you need to know. It actually wants the chemical equation, but for this test, I will ask for the word. Next test, when we actually do the process of photosynthesis, I'll ask for the chemical. So it says carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of light and chlorophyll gives you glucose and oxygen. And the glucose can be used by the plant immediately as fuel to produce energy, or it can be stored, and it's stored in fruits. And again, veggies are the roots, stems, and leaves, and fruits are the ripened ovary typically. So that's where it would store those carbohydrates. Cellular respiration is basically backwards photosynthesis, and it's a process by which all cells, plant, animal, everything, breaks down that glucose and obtains energy for food. So the word equation that you're looking at is food or glucose meets oxygen, and in the presence of a mitochondria in eukaryotic cells, but prokaryotic cells don't have mitochondria, so they actually use their cell membrane to do most of these parts of the reaction. But food or glucose in the presence of oxygen will make carbon dioxide, water, and energy. And that energy, hopefully you know, is a nucleic acid in the form of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And I'm looking at the next page. So the nucleus, which controls the cell in response to the environment, we talked about pretty much all that. We talked about the nuclear structure. I didn't really mention that chromosomes are long thread-like structures, but hopefully you know that the DNA is what determines the physical characteristics. And then single cells, and I mentioned a little bit more in my notes about protists than what was in his notes, but protists can be single or multicellular, and some of them have chloroplasts, but most have mitochondria, and the job of that is to produce oxygen. So we talked about that, we talked about that, we talked about that. And I think we're good. So I think that sums up just a couple of things that I thought were in your notes that aren't. Feel free to read through the rest of those. There's just a little bit left. And make sure you know all the information you need for your test. We will do a study group to help you study, and have fun this week. I'll see you soon.